Greetings, and may the Force be with you. You're watching E1000 Space. Darth Plagueis was right. Not just partially right, or right about a few things. He was absolutely right. And yet, most Star Wars fans remember him only as a footnote in Palpatine's tale. A mysterious Sith master, whispered about in legends, whose legacy is overshadowed by the empire his apprentice built. But that's a tragic oversimplification. Darth Plagueis wasn't just Sidious' mentor. He was a revolutionary thinker, a philosopher of power, a mastermind who saw the rot at the heart of the Galactic Republic and dared to imagine something better. He wasn't obsessed with domination. He was obsessed with order, with balance, with progress. His ideas laid the foundation for a galactic shift that could have saved billions from suffering, if only he had lived long enough to see it through. In this video, we'll uncover the forgotten truth about Darth Plagueis. We'll explore how his vision reshaped the galaxy, long before the Clone Wars, long before the Empire, and why history may have painted a villain where there was, perhaps, a savior. It's time to tell the real story of Darth Plagueis the Wise. He was born as Higo Damask, immune from the icy, wealth-ridden world of Maijito, deep in the Outer Rim, but this name would eventually be buried beneath a darker legacy. Once chosen by the Bith Sith Lord Darth Tenebrous, he cast aside his old identity and was reborn as Darth Plagueis, a name that would echo in shadows for generations. From the beginning, Plagueis was not like other Sith. Where others lusted for raw power or quick conquest, Plagueis sought something far greater, transcendence through knowledge. Together with his master, he began delving into the long-forgotten depths of Sith alchemy, a mystic science once practiced by the ancient Sith species, long before the rise of the Dark Jedi who later stole their name. Darth Tenebrous had one goal: to create a Force-based virus, a biological weapon that would target beings with high midichlorian counts, selectively eradicating Jedi, other Force sects, and leaving only the Sith untouched. It was an attempt at final, absolute victory, but it was reckless, imprecise, and ultimately doomed to fail. Plagueis saw through the arrogance of his master. Tenebrous' obsession with the Jedi blinded him to the real source of decay. Not the Jedi themselves, but the corrupt Galactic Republic that propped them up. And so, in the ancient Sith tradition, Plagueis made his choice. He killed his master, fulfilling the rule of two, that the apprentice must rise only by overthrowing the master. But for Plagueis, this was not just tradition. It was justice, evolution. The Sith had to move beyond petty revenge against the Jedi. The true enemy was systemic, a rotting republic strangled by bureaucracy, greed, and incompetence. Darth Plagueis would no longer wage a spiritual war against the Jedi. He would wage a war of ideologies, against the very political structure of the galaxy. And thus began the rise of a Sith not consumed by hatred alone, but by purpose. To the untrained eye, the Galactic Senate of the Republic appeared noble, an arena of debate, diplomacy, and democratic rule. Scenes from the prequel trilogy often show hundreds of floating platforms, each occupied by a senator, casting votes to shape the fate of the galaxy. But beneath this illusion of fairness, Darth Plagueis saw the rotting core of the Republic's political structure. How could a government composed of a few hundred senators possibly claim to represent tens of thousands of star systems, spanning thousands of sentient species and entire sectors of inhabited space? The answer was painfully clear: they didn't. The Senate was dominated by representatives from the Inner Rim, wealthy, developed systems, many of them human majority colonies. These worlds held disproportionate influence and direct representation, while the Mid-Rim and Outer Rim, home to countless diverse civilizations, were deliberately left politically marginalized. Planets in the outer systems couldn't send direct representatives to the Senate unless they met steep requirements: immense fees, high economic output, or strategic value. In essence, the Senate had become a closed club, open only to those with wealth or political clout. The rest? They had to form federations just to earn a single, collective voice. Even worse, the votes of these federations, which represented entire sectors of underdeveloped space, were treated equally to those of individual core worlds, some of which governed only a single system. It was legislative mockery disguised as equality. But the hypocrisy didn't end there. While the Outer Rim struggled under these imposed limitations, the political elite of the Inner Rim treated its inhabitants as nothing more than cheap labor and its planets as resource colonies. And in the shadows of this so-called republic, the corruption spread like a disease. the Senate and its advisors secretly partnered with criminal syndicates, turning blind eyes to atrocities for political convenience. One of the most blatant examples was their collusion with the Hutt cartel, a criminal empire that dominated vast stretches of the Outer Rim. The Hutts controlled entire sectors through violence, slavery, and spice trafficking. And yet they were never truly opposed by the Republic. Why? Because they served a purpose. Spice, a powerful and addictive narcotic, was smuggled into the Inner Rim through these criminal networks. It was produced in Outer Rim slave camps, often by entire populations living under Hutt rule, and then funneled back into the core, where it lined the pockets of politicians and funded corporate expansion. In return, the Republic turned a blind eye to the slavery, smuggling, and death that made it possible. Entire generations were lost to this cycle of exploitation, all to preserve the illusion of peace and prosperity in the core. The Republic claimed to bring peace and justice to the galaxy, yet its leaders quietly enabled suffering, so long as the credits kept flowing. Darth Plagueis, born into this forgotten margin of the galaxy, saw the truth for what it was. He wasn't just a Sith Lord seeking power. He was a revolutionary, a reformer. His justice wasn't rooted in Jedi dogma or Senate procedure. It was born from the lived experience of neglect, exploitation, and betrayal. That's why he began his political crusade not in the Senate, not in the core worlds, but in the Outer Rim, among the silenced, the scavenged, and the forsaken. Because Plagueis knew, true justice doesn't come from above. It rises from the edge. Darth Plagueis did not merely envision change, he engineered a revolution. At the heart of this upheaval was the creation of a political and economic alliance unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen, the Galactic Trade Federation. Unlike other federations that operated under the bureaucratic leash of the Galactic Republic, Plagueis' federation stood in ideological defiance of the core's political elite. It wasn't just a trade union, it was a movement, a declaration that the outer and mid-rim worlds would no longer be exploited. The Galactic Trade Federation rejected the centuries-old practice of funneling raw materials from the outskirts into the factories and vaults of the Inner Rim. Instead, it turned those same raw materials into prosperity, on-site, at home, for the people who lived there. The worlds that had long served as mining colonies and labor camps for the core began to awaken. Factories rose from deserts. Research labs appeared in the jungles. Droid foundries echoed in the canyons. The very same Outer Rim planets, once dismissed as primitive or lawless, began transforming into technological giants, rivaling even the wealthiest Inner Rim systems. This transformation wasn't limited to the economy, it was civilizational. With newfound industrial capacity, these worlds built vast droid armies, interstellar fleets, and complex infrastructure, capable of defending their autonomy against both the Hutt's criminal influence and the Republic's colonial ambitions. The crime lords who once thrived in lawless territories found themselves outgunned and outorganized. Even the Hutt cartel's grip began to crack as Plagueis' federation brought order to the Rim, not through Jedi diplomacy, but through power, prosperity, and purpose. As factories replaced spice labs, and schools replaced smuggling dens, the social fabric of these neglected regions began to heal. Opportunities in science, manufacturing, and governance gave rise to education, literacy, and civic pride. The people who once turned to piracy or slavery out of desperation now became engineers, pilots, and scholars. The untapped potential of entire generations was finally set free. It is no coincidence that the Death Star, perhaps the most infamous technological marvel in the history of the galaxy, was conceived not in the sterile halls of Coruscant, but in the shipyards of Geonosis, deep within the Outer Rim. It was a symbol of both fear and power, but more than that, it was proof of what these once marginalized worlds were capable of when given the means to shape their own future. As the movement grew, smaller and scattered federations across the Mid- and Outer Rim saw something they had never seen before, a path to true sovereignty. And one by one, they began to unite under the banner of the Galactic Trade Federation. In a matter of years, the Federation, born in resistance, forged through innovation, became the single greatest economic, military, and political force in the galaxy. And it all began with a vision of one Sith Lord, long misunderstood and long ignored, Darth Plagueis. By the height of his influence, Darth Plagueis, publicly known as Hego Damask, was far more than a shadowy figure in the Outer Rim. He had become a king without a crown, wielding political and financial influence that extended from the forgotten fringes of the galaxy all the way to its opulent heart. While the Galactic Trade Federation transformed the Mid-and-Outer Rim worlds into industrial titans, Plagueis launched a far more subtle conquest of the core worlds and Inner Rim. One fought not with fleets, but with finance. The core, despite its vast wealth and sophisticated infrastructure, was rotting from within. Generations of corruption, nepotism, and aristocratic mismanagement had eroded its once legendary prosperity. Many worlds were held hostage by their own elites, who siphoned off resources and failed to adapt to the changing galactic economy. These planets found themselves slipping into economic stagnation, and Darth Plagueis was waiting. Through a network of banks he quietly established in the Inner Rim, Plagueis extended long-term loans to local governments, planetary authorities, and even corporate conglomerates, presenting himself as a savior to those desperate to escape fiscal collapse. But these lifelines came at a price. Simultaneously, he founded powerful investment firms and trade institutions, strategically flooding the same markets his borrowers needed to recover. These financial juggernauts, technically unaffiliated with the Galactic Trade Federation, were in fact carefully controlled subsidiaries of his growing empire. It was a silent form of domination. He created the illness and sold the cure. The same sectors that failing planets relied on to rebuild, mining, shipping, energy, manufacturing, were monopolized by Plagueis' vast investment web. No matter which path the elite took to escape collapse, they walked into his trap. Even the mighty aristocrats and merchant princes of the core, those who once viewed the Outer Rim as little more than a supply chain, found themselves beholden to a mysterious financier they could neither touch nor defeat. In boardrooms and Senate chambers alike, deals were made not in credits or contracts, but in silence and deference. Plagueis never raised a weapon. He made the galaxy come to him. And when the Clone Wars erupted between the Galactic Republic and the Galactic Trade Federation, this network of banks, holding companies, and trade alliances continued to operate in plain sight, untouched. Protected by legal distance, yet bound by invisible chains, these organizations remained active in the Inner Rim, quietly fueling the machine Plagueis had built. His genius was not just in wielding the Force, but in bending the entire economy of the galaxy to his will. Darth Plagueis wasn't merely a Sith Lord or a visionary leader. He was the undisputed architect of galactic commerce, the invisible hand pulling strings from both the shadows and the boardrooms. And in the end, even the Republic itself would dance to the tune he composed. Amid the countless worlds of the Outer Rim, one planet stood out to Darth Plagueis like a spark in the dark: Naboo. Though geographically distant from the core, Naboo held a rare privilege. It was one of the few Outer Rim planets granted direct representation in the Galactic Senate. This, combined with its idyllic climate, vast mineral wealth, and untapped natural reserves, made it a gem among the backwater systems, a paradise cloaked in political contradiction. But beneath its serene lakes and rolling plains, Naboo was a planet built on injustice. Colonized directly by humans, its indigenous population, the Gungans, had been driven into the depths, forced to build their cities beneath the waters to escape persecution. The Gungans, once surface dwellers, had faced violent suppression and near-genocidal displacement. Their history had been erased from the planet's official narrative, reduced to whispers beneath the waves. What made Naboo even more significant was its proximity to Tatooine, a lawless desert world caught in the grip of Hutt criminal enterprises. This sector of space had quietly become a critical artery for smuggling, weapons trafficking, and spice trade, routes that led directly into the core worlds. Naboo's strategic location offered a key to controlling those routes. Whoever held Naboo didn't just hold a planet, they held a gate to economic dominance or decay. Darth Plagueis, ever the strategist, saw an opportunity not just to reform, but to reclaim Naboo as a model for his vision of galactic order. He did not invade or conquer. Instead, he approached with diplomacy. Through the authority of the Galactic Trade Federation, he extended a powerful and peaceful offer to one of Naboo's most influential dynasties, the House of Palpatine. The terms were clear. If the Naboo monarchy granted full citizenship and voting rights to the Gungans, thus expanding the electorate, the prestige of the Palpatine name would virtually guarantee their victory in the upcoming elections. In return, Naboo would formally join the Galactic Trade Federation, gaining economic protection, technological investment, and political support. It was a proposal that would benefit every faction. the disenfranchised Gungans would reclaim dignity and legal standing. The humans of Naboo would enjoy a new era of prosperity under the Federation's economic umbrella. The Palpatines would rise to power, and the Federation would gain control over a strategic node in the Outer Rim. Some of you may argue that Darth Plagueis had no genuine concern for the well-being of the Gungans or the wider suffering of the Outer Rim. That his actions were merely part of a Sith plot to expand his power base. That may be true to some extent. Yet, let us ask, who else had ever tried to bring order, equality, or economic renewal to these neglected regions? Until Darth Plagueis, no one in the political elite of the Galactic Republic paid any attention to the chaos, crime, and misery that festered in these outer systems. Plagueis may have been a Sith, but at least he looked beyond Coruscant's glow and saw value in the shadows. The patriarch of the family, Kosinga Palpatine, who had recently suffered a humiliating electoral defeat, spurned the offer. Blinded by pride and contempt for the Gungans, he rejected the alliance and cast aside the potential future that Darth Plagueis had laid before him. Only one within the House of Palpatine recognized the scope of the moment: Sheev Palpatine, the eldest son. Charismatic, ambitious, and acutely aware of his father's political stagnation, Sheev saw in Plagueis' proposal not a bargain, but a destiny. He broke ranks with his family and insisted that the offer be accepted. His courage to defy tradition and blood caught the attention of Darth Plagueis. From the very first meeting between the two on the quiet world of Naboo, something ancient and powerful stirred. An alliance was forged, not of necessity, but of shared vision. The Sith Lord and the young nobleman would become co-conspirators in reshaping the galaxy, bound by ideology and ambition. That moment on Naboo was more than a negotiation. It was the first tremor of a coming storm. A storm that would upend the Republic, drown the Jedi, and reorder the galaxy under a new power. At first, Darth Plagueis introduced himself to the young Palpatine as merely a fan of ancient Sith culture and history, a curious, cultured admirer of the dark arts, nothing more. However, over time, Sheev Palpatine developed a deep interest in ancient Sith science and philosophy. This, of course, was exactly what Darth Plagueis had hoped for. Once Palpatine's obsession with forbidden knowledge had taken root, Plagueis revealed the truth. He was no mere scholar, but a Sith Lord, the one known as Darth Plagueis. Recognizing the raw potential within the ambitious young noble, Plagueis took Sheev Palpatine as his apprentice. From that moment forward, the boy who had grown up in the cold halls of House Palpatine began his descent into the shadows. Under Plagueis' brutal yet methodical guidance, he was introduced to the secrets of the dark side of the Force. And soon, Palpatine's hidden potential began to emerge. He proved to be more than a student. He was exceptional, ruthless, gifted. When Plagueis believed his apprentice was ready, he gave him his first test, a task that would erase his past and bind him to the Sith forever, destroy his own family. The Palpatine house, once a proud and powerful dynasty on Naboo, was eliminated silently and efficiently. And when the blood had dried, Plagueis gave his apprentice a new name, Darth Sidious. Using Plagueis' vast network, particularly his connections with the Galactic Trade Federation, they orchestrated the narrative. The blame for the assassination was pinned on Naboo's political enemies. In the eyes of society, young Sheev Palpatine became the lone survivor of a political massacre, a tragic noble scarred by injustice. With this false sympathy came political capital. As the last living member of House Palpatine, Sidious carefully crafted an image of humility, pain, and public service. His rise in Naboo's social hierarchy was swift, but the plan went beyond local prestige. This time, Darth Plagueis and his apprentice weren't aiming for a throne. They were targeting the Galactic Senate itself. They sought to position Darth Sidious as a senator, not a monarch. From Coruscant, the political heart of the galaxy, they would steer galactic events from the shadows with far greater influence than any king could wield. To complete the illusion of balance and reform, they also ensured the election of a new queen, Padme Amidala, just 14 years old. With the discreet influence of both Plagueis and Sidious, she was elevated as a symbol of hope and youth. But in truth, she was chosen for her naivety and malleability, a figure they could manipulate with ease. Meanwhile, Plagueis understood the need for subtlety and secrecy. He directed his apprentice to train a Sith assassin, someone who could act in the dark while Sidious remained hidden. Thus began the rise of Maul, a night brother from the shadowed world of Dathomir. Bred by cruelty, trained through pain, and unleashed with purpose, Darth Maul would become the hidden blade of the Sith's grand plan. At the same time, Darth Plagueis turned further inward, returning to the forbidden arts his own master had once explored. Like Darth Tenebrous before him, he began to study the ancient and dangerous practices of Sith alchemy. But Plagueis didn't stop at theory. He began conducting real experiments, attempting to manipulate midichlorians to create life itself. His power grew to such an extent that whispers across the Outer Rim began referring to him as Darth Plagueis the Wise, a name not granted, but earned, through decades of obsession, isolation, and unprecedented discoveries in the Force. Eventually, Plagueis achieved something few believed was even possible. He could influence the midichlorians to create life. Though the full details of his experiments remain lost to time, most believe that he and Darth Sidious worked together on these force-bending rituals, possibly conducting them on Naboo, hidden beneath the planet's noble facade. And then, it happened. On the remote, sun-scorched world of Tatooine, near Naboo's sector of space, a child was born. No father, no conception, no explanation. A child shaped purely by the will of the Force. His name was Anakin Skywalker, the Chosen One, a being of unprecedented power, a boy whose very existence hinted at Plagueis' forbidden experiments, the unintended consequence of tampering with the sacred mechanics of life. But the Sith Lords could not control the form or the place of this new creation. The Force had answered their summons, in its own way, and so began the legend of Anakin Skywalker, a boy born from prophecy, war, and perhaps the ambition of Darth Plagueis. Despite mounting pressure from the Galactic Trade Federation, the Naboo authorities refused to abandon their oppressive policies against the Gungan people, nor did they sever their underhanded alliances with the Hutt cartel. Their arrogance ran deep, rooted in the belief that no Outer Rim force could challenge their control, or expose the centuries-old crimes buried beneath Naboo's surface. But Darth Plagueis had grown tired of empty diplomacy, and so, acting through the Federation, he ordered the blockade of Naboo. Officially, it was framed as an economic sanction, justified as a response to trade restrictions, regional instability, and the need to protect the broader welfare of Outer Rim worlds. But in truth, it was a test, a calculated move by Plagueis to expose the Republic's hypocrisy and provoke its supposed guardians into revealing their true nature. The blockade worked. Backed into a corner, the Naboo political elite did what countless core world aristocrats had done for generations. They called on the Jedi Order. And so, Star Wars Episode 1 begins, not with grand galactic diplomacy, but with a tactical deployment. Two Jedi, Qui-Gon Jinn and Obi-Wan Kenobi, are sent to resolve the conflict. But their mission was never about peace. From the start, the Jedi weren't acting as negotiators. They arrived as enforcers, weapons of the Republic's elite, masked beneath robes and doctrine. Their role was not to understand the cause of the conflict, but to eliminate the obstacle. The Trade Federation's viceroy, Newt Gunray, understood this perfectly. As the nominal head of the Federation's blockade, Gunray confronted the Jedi not with hostility, but with legality. He warned them that the blockade was within Republic law, technically valid and politically defensible. The Jedi didn't care. They weren't there to read trade agreements. They were there to break them. This is one of the earliest moments in the saga where we see the Jedi for what they have become. Not peacekeepers, but agents of the status quo, dispatched to protect the interests of core world power. Faced with this reality, Gunray tried to avoid a direct confrontation. He knew he was outmatched. But his fear wasn't of the Jedi, it was of what stood behind them, a Republic too blind to see its own corruption. And what if they had encountered Darth Plagueis himself? The answer is simple: they would not have survived. Plagueis, by this time, had become one of the most powerful Force users in galactic history. His knowledge of the dark side, his control over life and death, and his mastery of ancient Sith disciplines far exceeded anything a Jedi Knight or even a seasoned master could match. Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan, despite their skill and bravery, would have been effortlessly overwhelmed. But Plagueis wasn't interested in sabers or duels. His war was waged through shadows, not through brute force, but through influence, deception, and strategy. And what about the Gungans? As the Jedi moved deeper into the conflict, we're given a subtle yet damning insight into the prejudice baked into the Republic's elite. When Qui-Gon Jinn first encounters Jar Jar Binks, he scoffs with a now infamous line, the ability to speak does not make you intelligent. That line wasn't just arrogance. It was revelation. Even the Jedi were unaware of the Gungan civilization, despite its ancient presence on Naboo. How could this be? The answer is chilling. The authorities of Naboo had likely hidden the existence of the Gungans from the Republic. Before colonization, they may have systematically driven the native species into exile, a quiet genocide beneath the waters. As this conflict played out, Darth Plagueis and Darth Sidious were already several moves ahead, watching everything unfold from the heart of the galaxy. While Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan battled droids in the swamps of Naboo, Plagueis and his apprentice met in secret on Coruscant, far from the chaos. Sheev Palpatine, now rising within the Senate, played both sides with flawless precision. On the surface, he appeared to be an advocate for Naboo, but in reality, he was orchestrating a galactic crisis designed to accelerate his own rise to power. It's believed that Plagueis was also present on Coruscant during these events, likely posing, once again, as Higo Damask, the unassuming Mune banker and diplomat affiliated with the Galactic Trade Federation. If you look closely in the Senate scenes of The Phantom Menace, you can briefly spot a tall, robed Mune figure standing near Palpatine. It may be only a few seconds, but for those who know what to look for, that was Darth Plagueis, watching as his great game unfolded, piece by piece. When Darth Plagueis discovered that the Jedi had departed Naboo's orbit alongside the planet's political elite, he ordered his apprentice to act. Maul was to be dispatched to hunt them down and eliminate them. A swift, silent strike to tie up loose ends. But Sidious had other intentions. By this point, Darth Sidious had already begun plotting against his master. The betrayal wasn't sudden. It had been simmering beneath years of loyalty, obedience, and careful planning. Plagueis believed Maul was being trained as a mere Sith assassin, a servant to the Sith Order's long-term survival. But Sidious was training a replacement. Not only did he hone Maul's body and mind in the ways of the dark side, he even gave him the sacred title of Darth, a title reserved only for true Sith Lords. It wasn't just flattery, it was preparation for the day when Sidious alone would rule the Sith legacy. When Maul was sent to Tatooine, his mission was not to kill the Jedi or destroy the stranded political delegation. His purpose was theatrical, symbolic, strategic. Sidious instructed Maul not to eliminate the Jedi, but to confront them and then let them go. Maul was never meant to kill. He was meant to be seen. Darth Sidious's assignment of Maul had two goals: to draw the attention of the Jedi Council and the Galactic Republic to the Forgotten Regions, the Outer Rim, to create the illusion of an oppressed, rising power in the eyes of the Senate. A faceless Sith warrior emerging from the shadows would spark panic, not open war, but that panic would shift the Republic's center of gravity towards Sidious's narrative. He knew this tactic would work. He had seen it succeed once before, in his youth, after orchestrating the death of his own family. By casting himself as the tragic survivor of a political conspiracy, Sheev Palpatine had won public sympathy, gained power, and climbed through Naboo's ranks. That same formula, oppression turned into political capital, was now being weaponized at a galactic scale. And it worked. Again. In the aftermath of the Trade Federation crisis, Sheev Palpatine's measured response, his advocacy for peace, his calm in the storm, all of it positioned him as the voice of reason in a time of fear. He became Counselor of the Galactic Republic. It was the highest political position he could reach without yet holding the Chancellorship, and he had achieved it without drawing a single lightsaber. But Sidious's plans didn't stop there. Even before these events, Sidious had already begun corrupting the Jedi from within. He had spent years cultivating doubts in the minds of key figures, Jedi Master Sifo Dyas and the aristocratic Jedi Knight known as Count Dooku. To Sifo Dyas, he whispered about war, that the Republic was vulnerable, that the Jedi were blind. He convinced him of the need for a standing army, a concept the Council had long rejected. To Dooku, he offered something deeper, not just prophecy, but purpose, a chance to remake the galaxy, to sever the Jedi from their dying ideals and rebuild power in the hands of those who understood what true order meant. Eventually, Dooku fell, but Sifo Dyas resisted. He believed in the Republic's flaws, but not in the dark side. He could not be turned. So, Sidious had him eliminated. Count Dooku, however, was a different case. Disillusioned with the Republic's corruption and the Jedi Council's arrogance, Dooku found in Sidious not a corruptor, but a liberator. And so, the noble Jedi Knight became Darth Tyrannus, another pawn in the Sith's growing arsenal. A loose end, a necessary sacrifice, and yet through it all, Sidious kept Plagueis in the dark. Every move, every manipulation, every death was explained away as coincidence, political fortune, strategic luck. Then, everything changed. On the desert world of Tatooine, while evading the Trade Federation, the Jedi encountered a child, Anakin Skywalker. A boy with no father, an impossible Force presence, the Chosen One. To Plagueis, this was no miracle. It was confirmation. Anakin was the result of their forbidden experiments, a living testament to the years Plagueis had spent mastering the manipulation of midichlorians through Sith alchemy. They had succeeded where even the ancients had failed. They had created life. And now, standing before the Jedi, was the very being they had prophesied, not as a savior, but as a tool. Victory was within reach. They had infiltrated the Senate. They had compromised the Jedi. They had created the Chosen One. And they had engineered both sides of a galactic war that was about to ignite. Plagueis celebrated. Drunk with power, both figuratively and literally, he allowed himself one moment of triumph. One moment to believe the age of the Sith had truly begun. But he forgot his own law. There can only be two. That night, as he slipped into unconsciousness, Darth Sidious struck. Not in a duel, not in combat, but in cold, silent betrayal, with Force lightning that shattered the darkness. The Sith Master, who had once dreamed of reshaping the galaxy, was struck down by the very apprentice he believed he controlled. Plagueis' death wasn't the end of the Sith. It was the beginning of Sidious' empire. And then came the final sign. There was a stark difference in the ideologies of Darth Plagueis and his apprentice, Darth Sidious. Plagueis sought to establish a new structure of governance, not by seizing the Republic's throne, but by building something entirely new from the edges of the galaxy. He looked to the forgotten peoples of the Outer and Mid-Rim, those long neglected by core world politics, and envisioned an order born from economic reform, social integration, and technological advancement. Sidious, on the other hand, was never interested in lifting the margins. He wanted to dominate the center. His plan was to rebuild the Sith Empire within the corrupt machinery of the Galactic Republic, to manipulate the rot rather than replace it. This difference wasn't just philosophical, it shaped the destiny of the galaxy. As I've explained in earlier videos, had Darth Vader succeeded in overthrowing his master and becoming Emperor himself, the empire he built would have been no more stable than Sidious's. Vader, for all his strength, ruled through fear, not vision. His presence projected power, but not unity. He was seen not as a leader, but as a warlord. By contrast, if Darth Plagueis had succeeded, if his empire had been born, it would have been stable, resilient, and perhaps even welcomed. Because unlike his apprentice, Plagueis was not just a Sith. He was a savior, a scientist, a strategist, a philosopher, a businessman, and a builder. He sought not to enslave the galaxy but to restructure it. His reign would not have lasted 20 brittle years like Sidious's. It may have endured for centuries. Had he not been betrayed on Coruscant, he would have arrived on Naboo before Padme Amidala and extended his hand not to the aristocracy, but to the Gungans. The Gungans would have seen Higo Damask as a liberator, a Mune who stood not above them, but beside them. In response, they would have voted, willingly and democratically, to join the Galactic Trade Federation. Amidala would have had no choice but to respect the results of the referendum. Unlike in the canon timeline, where the Gungans were only approached as a last resort, here they would have been empowered citizens, not manipulated foot soldiers. For the first time in centuries of colonial rule, the Gungans would have been seen, respected, and integrated into galactic politics. In truth, the political elite of Naboo only regained their position due to Darth Sidious's manipulations, not through merit or alliance. The clearest proof lies in the dramatic shift between the beginning and end of Episode 1. Dozens of Trade Federation control ships enforced the blockade, yet young Anakin Skywalker ended it all by destroying just one. Why? Because Sidious needed to end the crisis cleanly. He couldn't afford to let galactic war erupt on his own home planet. After becoming Counselor of the Galactic Republic, he deliberately weakened the Federation, not out of ideology, but to protect his image. Had Plagueis lived, things would have been different. The Republic wouldn't have rushed to create a clone army. Instead, it would have been forced to recognize the new governmental structure rising under Higo Damask, a structure built on economic independence, social cohesion, and droid labor. Palpatine may still have remained counselor, but the true power would lie with his master, Emperor Higo Damask. His army? Not clones, not conscripts, droids, billions of them, built with purpose, evolving with technology. Plagueis would have transformed warfare, not by replacing people, but by removing the cost of war from human life entirely. And in this new empire, the Jedi would not have been hunted, they would have been repurposed. Plagueis didn't see the Jedi as rivals. He saw them as tools, a disciplined, spiritual military force already trained to obey the elite. He would have reformed them, not destroyed them. Much like the Inquisitors of Sidious's reign, the Jedi would have become a new garrison of order, a state-run religion, a weaponized bureaucracy. Even if they discover the truth, that their emperor was a Sith Lord, it would have changed little. They would face an empire with billions of automated soldiers and unified galactic support. They would be outnumbered, outmaneuvered, outmatched. Any resistance would be met with a command akin to Order 66, and the Jedi would vanish, not in fire, but in silence. And there's more. Count Dooku, once disillusioned with the Jedi Council, would likely have joined Plagueis willingly, not out of vengeance, but out of belief. He would have seen in Higo Damask the idealism the Jedi had lost. And through him, and others, Plagueis would have fractured the Order from within, until ancient hatreds between Jedi and Sith simply dissolved. Of course, Sidious would have eventually tried to rise against him. That much was inevitable. Perhaps he would have plotted with Darth Maul, thinking numbers could defeat wisdom. But Plagueis would not face him alone. He would bring with him his second apprentice, a child trained not only in the Force, but in politics, diplomacy, and legacy. Darth Vader, the Chosen One. Under Sidious, Anakin was reduced to a weapon, a tool of fear. But under Plagueis, he would have become a ruler, a leader, a Sith worthy of the mantle of Emperor. Darth Plagueis would have trained him in statecraft, not slaughter. He would have made him a master of vision, not vengeance. And if Vader were ever to rise and replace his master, he would have inherited a thriving empire, not a broken one. Like many lifelong Star Wars fans, I found The Acolyte deeply disappointing. It clashed with a rich, established lore that has defined the galaxy for decades. And in many ways, it felt like a betrayal of what made Star Wars meaningful. The narrative inconsistencies, the thematic disconnects, the shallow characterization, it hurt. We all felt it. And yet, amidst all that frustration, there was a flicker of potential. Had a second season been released, we might have seen something truly worthwhile. Darth Plagueis exploring the secrets of the Force buried in the forgotten corners of the galaxy. That alone, for me, was reason enough to hope. Not because I trusted the creators, but because the idea, the concept of Plagueis' dark journey into knowledge, was powerful. The most striking moment in Season 1, without a doubt, was the brief glimpse of Darth Plagueis himself. Just a few seconds, a fleeting shadow, but enough to spark speculation and excitement. Like many fans, I believe the shadowy figure portrayed was none other than Darth Tenebrous, Plagueis' own master. The idea of those two Sith Lords, teacher and apprentice, traveling together into uncharted parts of the galaxy, unearthing forbidden truths about the Force, was electrifying. It was the story we had been waiting for. Unfortunately, the filmmakers clearly didn't understand the deeper lore of Star Wars, nor did they respect the intricate history of the Sith or the mythic weight carried by Plagueis' legacy. Still, hope remains. Perhaps one day, Disney will greenlight a true Star Wars film or series centered on Darth Plagueis, one that explores his origins, his ideology, and his rise as a visionary who almost reshaped the galaxy. A story not about destruction, but about ambition, betrayal, and the cost of knowledge. Until then, we're left with whispers and the wisdom of Darth Plagueis the Wise. If this made you question what you thought you knew about Star Wars, don't forget to like, subscribe, and drop a comment. Were the Jedi peacekeepers or galactic enforcers?